G'day guys and welcome to the studio. Today is going to be a bit of a fun one. We're doing pet portraits. Now, as an artist, a lot of the work that we do just kind of goes away after a while because we kind of finish the work, it served a purpose, and then we move on to the next piece. Maybe we sell old work or just put it in a box of shame. But if you do something like a pet portrait, that's the kind of painting that's going to stick around in your house probably for the rest of your life. And your other family members, like my wife actually requested that I paint the dog. She's going to be really happy to have this portrait. And pet portraiture is also one of those places where a lot of artists begin to do commissioned work. So if you post pictures like this on Reddit and Instagram and stuff, chances are someone is, if you've done a good job, someone's going to contact you and say, hey, can you paint my dog? Can you paint my cat? Because that's one thing you can always be sure of. People love their pets because they are just so damn cute. So our subject for today is my dog, Nala. You know what Nala had for breakfast this morning? My wallet. Yep, and you know what she got for that? A walk to the park. Dogs have it so damn easy. I wish I was a dog. You can't blame them for anything because they just look at you with those goddamn eyes and they say, I don't understand, and I love you. And you just can't help but forgive them for anything. Dogs, and yet I'm going to paint her portrait and put it on my wall. Now, let's actually start talking about this painting. You can see that I started by just roughing out the general proportions of Nala using a bit of very diluted burnt sienna. Now, you can have a rag on hand when you're doing this and completely rub things out if you don't like how it is. You can be pretty messy if you use the right underpainting colour. Now, Nala is a nice warm golden kind of beige colour. So I chose burnt sienna as my underpainting colour because it's one of the main pigments that I'm going to use in her fur. And that means that when I add more layers of paint on top to build up the forms, if that underpainting mixes with the paint that I'm applying on top, it doesn't matter. It's just going to add some warmth to the edges, which is actually a desirable effect. So don't be afraid to just shift the lines around to get the proportions right, because with any kind of portraiture, dog or human, the most important part is getting the distances and relationships of the different facial features correct. It's why caricatures work, because you've identified the proportions and relationships of a person's facial features that are fundamental to their appearance, and you've exaggerated them. So get those proportions and relationships correct. Now, the other most important thing, other than getting that likeness, is to describe the forms correctly. And this is somewhere where I believe many pet portraits come unstuck, because people often have a tendency to really get stuck into the details and they try to draw every hair, try and make it look as realistic as possible. But realism doesn't really have much to do with detail. Detail is just the icing. So if you over detail the image, you run the risk of losing focus on the important parts, the likeness, the forms, the overall read of the image. Those are the things that are more important. So those are the things you should focus on. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to say that hyper-realistic portraits can't be fantastic. There are so many people out there who do an incredible job, and I don't want to detract from that one bit. But whenever those hyper-realistic portraits come unstuck, it's never because of a lack of detail. It's always some problem with the underlying structure, and that is why we have to prioritize getting that right, because if you move forward on top of a dodgy foundation, there is no amount of detail in the world that is going to save that portrait. Now, I'm working from a photo that I took of Nala just before I started the painting. And if you're working from a photo too, it's really important that you get some decent lighting. You need a clear direction for the lighting, because you really need those forms to be clearly described. Otherwise, you run the risk of ending up with a really flat and lifeless image, and that's exactly the opposite of what you're trying to achieve. The reference photo that I used for this painting wasn't actually as lively as this. I actually increased the amount of light in the scene. In fact, the reference image that I used actually doesn't look much like the final product. At some point, I stopped looking at it completely because I know what Nala looks like, and I'm more interested in trying to get a likeness than I am trying to copy a photo. So I altered the expression, I altered the eyebrows, and I basically used the photo just as a bit of reference for the structure. It's funny actually, because in the end, I actually feel that the painting looks more like Nala than the photo, which is weird because it's clearly less accurate. But when I was taking the reference photo, Nala wasn't necessarily cooperating. She thought I was going to give her food or something. So she kept looking at my hands and turning around and doing tricks unprompted, which is adorable. But she wasn't really making any of those iconic expressions that I know and love about her. So I had to go off script a little bit. And don't be afraid to do that. Just experiment and try and capture the personality of your subject, rather than getting distracted by all the little details, the direction of the hairs and the little whiskers and things. Now, I don't paint an overly detailed rendered style, so I'm not really familiar with it, but I would recommend that if that is the style that you are interested in and that you want to go for, that you start with a foundation like what I'm doing here, and then once you've captured that expression and the overall feel of the image, that you then go in and try and add those details at a later date, maybe once the painting has dried. And the reason I say this is because getting a likeness is a delicate balance, okay? It's about the entire image. Have you ever seen those photos of artwork on Reddit or something like that, where you have this incredibly detailed eye surrounded by a loose sketch of the outline of someone or a dog or something like that? And the eye alone looks incredible and hyper-realistic, and then as the person continues to work and you flip through the different photos, they add in the second eye at some point, and it just doesn't fit with the first eye because the person is not thinking about the image as a whole. But hey, those posts usually get 20,000 likes or something on the internet, so what do I know? It really is strange actually. So many people seem to idolize detail, as if it somehow makes the image great. I used to idolize detail when I first started. I thought, if only I could add more and more detail, then I would have something that looked real, something that looked perfect. But there's no such thing as perfect. If there was, the photo would be perfect because it has all that detail in it. But the photo I used sucked. It's not very good. In fact, most of the photos I take are terrible. How is it that using the same tool, a professional photographer can make something look beautiful, whereas I can't? It's because the art doesn't lie in the details. It's like saying a poem would be better if it was 500 pages long. That's absurd. More words doesn't make a better poem. More notes doesn't make a better song. More ingredients doesn't make a better dish. And more detail doesn't make a better painting.